Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I clicked OK on the recording in progress.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's proceed because I know even if people don't arrive now, they're also counting on being able to see you
Mhm.
later after, and that's for real. So I will say to all and sundry, welcome to the 31st reading in the Speculative Sundays Poetry Reading Series and the second reading in Starburst, our special series celebrating Women's History Month. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. I'm Akua Lezli Hope, speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the area currently called the Southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, the Onondaga, past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors by whose grace I exist and am sustained. This event is funded in part by poets and writers with public funds from the New York State Council of the Arts, with the support of the New York State Legislature. Inaugurated in September 2020, this series seeks to remediate the paucity of presentations of speculative poetry by its living creators. Speculative Sundays Reading Series has presented 30 other poets thus far. Let me tell you a bit about speculative poetry. It's the poetry of possibilities and includes alternate history, cryptids, monsters, cyberfunk, cyberpunk, dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, mythology, occult, paranormal, robots, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, space opera, superhero, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and weird. It takes all poetic forms, plus scifaiku. When I think of the history of women in speculative poetry, I'm reminded of Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market and Emily Dickinson's Witch poems, both of them writing before the 20th century. So hundreds of years, not even thinking about our ancient forebears in the realm of the speculative. Tonight's wonderful poet is Dr. Angela Acosta, a bilingual Mexican-American poet and visiting assistant professor of Hispanic studies at Davidson College. Her creative and academic work centers on imagining possible worlds and preserving the cultural legacies of women writers. She is a 2022 Dream Foundry Contest for Emerging Writers finalist, a 2022 Somos en Escrito Extra Fiction Contest honorable mention, Best of the Net nominee, and Riesling finalist. Her writing has appeared in Shoreline of Infinity, Apparition Lit, Radon Journal, and Space and Time. She is author of Summoning Space Travelers, High Wraith Publishing 2022, A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness, Poems of a Fabled Universe, Red Ogre Review 2023, and Fourth Generation Jacana Unicorn, Dancing Girl Press 2023. She is published on female life writing, poetry, and literary personas in Persona Studies, Ambitos Feministas, and Feminist Modern Studies. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, so I'll be reading some of my poems from my newest collection, A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness, which was published by Red Ogre Review last year as part of their inaugural chapbook series. And it has this wonderful image on the front by Janice Butler Home. And I'll also be incorporating some poems from that have been recently published and things that really spoke to me in terms of celebrating Women's History Month, celebrating some Latinx women protagonists and characters in my poems. So I'll be reading a varied selection, primarily of science fiction poetry. This first poem is titled Ancestral Travelogue from Prose Poems, the February 2024 issue. And like it says in the name, it's a prose poem with some parts in brackets. So it begins as in brackets, archaic greeting roughly translated to salutations, my daughter. You want to believe someone will hear this. Abyss, vacuum. Space haunts your sleep-addled thoughts, and your delirious mind writes down the name of every person you can remember. It's only a fraction of your memories, a slice of the life you lived on a planet that eventually will succumb to the same type of hibernation you signed up for. Please for forgiveness. References to historical events cross-checked with the encyclopedia. You wonder if comfort means multi-species survival where these future humans come from. In the grand scheme of things, who do these ships benefit? Should you tell them why you're leaving? Or will they think that too is a lie? Graphs whose legends have peeled, chips diagrams of reconnaissance missions to the exoplanet. You write by hand, by machine, slipping between your mother tongue and English so readily so only you will be able to interpret this in the end. Was it ever about posterity? Drawings, stained by ink in some places, decorate the edges of the travelogue. Blue ink marks the beginning of long-term human life beyond Earth. This next poem is one of my favorites. It's titled The Optics of Space Travel, and it was first published in the January 2022 issue of Eye to the Telescope. The Optics of Space Travel. I descend from those who immigrated on ships, the ones who crossed oceans, mountains, and borders, passing through the threshold of space at escape velocity, a Terran whose names reflect peoples encountered and lives lived. Our eyes meet briefly as cloudy, stormy great-grandmother eyes take me in, a child still learning to see the world in all its color. In that moment, she wishes a single glance to grace her descendants with her decades of wisdom and travel plans for a new tomorrow. Space travel is not a problem of triangulation and radio waves, as our space-born kin gather in new types of ships, no longer tethered by gravity, but the optics of human life itself, the focal point between the past and future through which a telescope points towards unborn generations. My eyes are the bridge between worlds and generations when languages and cultures have been assimilated out of me. I can still see the road ahead, of stories yet to be told, onward towards Mars and the deceleration of the universe. When my light goes out, the story will continue, a new beginning shining on through passing millennia, a taste of biological immortality, not through cellular therapy, but the stares and fleeting glances sparking emotions between us that give us life and a reason to live. And while I was writing this poem, I was thinking about another poem I wrote first in Spanish called Matriarch or Matriarca, which had to do a speculative retelling of the time I met my only living great-grandmother when I was about 6 years old. So it was something that I wove into this poem and thought a bit about since there was only one great-grandmother who was alive while I was, and I had an opportunity to meet her as a kid. And then this next piece is the start of two poems that are a bit more about female protagonists and romance and love in a different sort of way than just familial like the previous poem. So this poem is titled What It Was Like to Be Grounded, and it appeared in the Worlds of a Possibility 2023 anthology. And it was a time for me to work more narrative into my poems and develop these characters. And a similar context that I write about elsewhere in terms of going into new planets and traveling in spaceships. So this is titled What It Was Like to Be Grounded. Born before Mars exploration, Perla was always the older one, dashingly timeless, with salt and pepper hair that put flavor into the dishes she prepared for her perpetual house guest from the 25th century. Back when they believed in linear time, they imagined a life together with a small cottage, a handsome dog who they doted on, and maybe, just maybe, kids who would make them both mothers. When M slipped into the comma cluster, heading towards yet to be named galaxies, Verla aged in time with the Milky Way, letting time dilation spill across their relationship until old and young were just pre space age adjectives. Verla brought M tidings of her wise ways, while M soaked up the mysteries of binary systems that shone light across swaths of space and wrinkled skin. They confused their time apart for lifetimes, shook decades out of their skin like stardust the moment lanky limbs finally coalesced as one beating heart. Getting older is an example of entropy propagating across cosmic infinities of time and space, the inescapable dread of mortality, creeping into a strong desire for sapphic domesticity and happy queer futures for dyads who refuse to make flight crews their only family. Try as they might to ground themselves with reminders of who was once older, forming two halves of a May December relationship turned intergalactic, they welcome this new life and chance to jump across timelines, leaping through habitable zones and a floating universe holding them steady on each supple lily pad and faster than light rocket. And this next piece follows a similar desire for bringing together two lives, even though time and time dilation and all of the light years between them might change their age or appearance. So this next piece is titled Planetfall, and it appears in Prismatica's October 2023 issue, which is the LGBTQ plus speculative poetry and fiction magazine. Planetfall. A sapphic pink and lavender sky betrays Maya's nerves, willing her to slow the ship's descent, softening her gaze on a pleasant planet she would gladly give a decade of her short human life. Streaks of flashing lights freckle the windows. A familiar warmth creeps over her hand, gently pressing on the hole. Soon these hands would be joined with another. We'll be together again soon, you, me, and the cellies you call chickens. You'll love the pebbled beaches, an endless scent of saffron looming over lazy hills. It would be like their orbit around Io, yet grounded. They would stretch on clover-laden ground and work in tented structures, nurturing organic life from tide pools. One day, their daughters would inhabit further stars. Maya trembles with the shuttle, her fellow passengers enmeshed in their seats and their minds. She stares at the colorful rows of suitcases. Her dwelling with Bere would be their first home together. Arrival unveils a litany of procedures and protocols, a quarantine from a lady waiting in the wings. And Maya envisions an outrageous fall in real gravity into the outstretched arms of her favorite xenobiologist. So those two pieces are ones that I want to kind of explore maybe in a future flash fiction piece or future poems, kind of putting together somebody's life or these two people's lives. And keeping with the theme of some Latinx futures, this next poem is titled Tamales on Mars, which appears in the very first issue of the Sprawl Mag, and is also one of my favorites. A bit shorter than I usually write. It's all just one stanza, but it imagines what it would be like to cook on Mars and kind of bringing our own culinary heritage from Earth rather than just trying to colonize this fourth planet from the sun. Tamales on Mars. The dry dirt of Mars could be the deserts of Chihuahua, Bolivian salt flats, or the frigid Patagonian steppe. Here, my bisabuela's recipes can find new homes with ingredients harvested and cooked underground. Pottery wheels hum in time with the wind, birthing new cooking vessels with gritty red stoneware. We make tamales on Sundays, filling them with the sweets of dried fruits left in the sun and cheeses from goats happily jumping in Martian gravity. The taste compares to Terran delights. We eat tamales and protein-rich beans around a roaring fire where colonists tell stories of skies of blue and arid deserts like these. And though it kind of takes its origins from tamales, which are of Mexican origin, it also kind of weaves in, as I do in many of my poems, different things like pupusas or arepas from other places in Latin America. But I'm most familiar with tamales. And then this next piece, I actually have both the English and Spanish version, which appeared in the 142nd issue of Space and Time, as well as in A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness, Poems of a Fabled Universe. So this is titled Andromeda's First Quinceañera, and part of the reason I'd like to read the Spanish poem too is because I added a bit more to the first stanza for those familiar with the Mexican happy birthday song Las Mañanitas. So this is first in English, Andromeda's First Quinceañera. Sophia awakes with a loopy smile in the throes of a rendition of Las Mañanitas. Mestiza daughter of the Morales family, her Spanish is melded to the walls of her generationship. She accepts a last doll, letting her mother brush her hair as the ship reaches its new home. Parting her hair, they thread whole constellations into her being, spiraling like Andromeda herself. She tells Mommy that she can't remember all the steps of the primer baile, first dance, doesn't know how to make a debut, and fears this heritage is not hers anymore. Mommy and Abuela assure her this is her birthright, a new galaxy for future rungs of the family tree. They honor them, Andromeda and Sophia, each coming into maturity and humanity. They dance, letting the neighborhood of stars wash over the assembled family. They eat, savoring warm tamales made from maseca passed down from corn seeds brought aboard centuries ago. On this day of her saint, Sophia shepherds the youth into a horizon of stellar possibilities, leaving nebulous nurseries for the certainty of habitable zones and exoplanetary orbits, all to celebrate Andromeda's first quinceañera. And now I'll read the Spanish version. And I should mention too, I've never actually had my own quinceañera. That was something I wish I had done if I were more connected maybe with my culture in terms of the way my family celebrates different cultural events and birthdays and things like that. But it's always kind of been something I wish I had. So I think that's definitely apparent in the poem in terms of this longing for these traditions and the dance and the last doll and things like that. So like I said, the Spanish poem adds on this remix of the Las Mañanitas song, calling it Las Mañanitas de la Galaxia. La primera quinceañera de Andrómeda. Sofía se despierta sonriendo al escuchar las mañanitas de la galaxia. Estas son las mañanitas que cantaban las estrellas, traídas desde Coyoacán, Sinaloa, Buenos Aires y Marbella, a través del tiempo y el espacio sideral. Ya no cesa el lazo generacional. Hoy por ser el día de tu santo, te las cantamos a ti. Hija mestiza de la familia Morales, su fluidez en español está pegada a las paredes de su nave generacional. Acepta la última muñeca y deja que su mami le peine el cabello mientras la nave está llegando a su nuevo hogar. Dividiendo su cabello, enhebran constelaciones enteras en su ser, dando vueltas como Andrómeda misma. Le dice a Mami que no recuerda todos los pasos del primer baile, no sabe cómo estrenarse y teme que esta herencia ya no es suya. Mami y Abuela le aseguran que este es su derecho de nacimiento, una nueva galaxia para ramas futuras de su árbol genealógico. Las honran a Andrómeda y a Sofía, cada uno llegando a la edad de madurez. Bailan dejando que las constelaciones sean el firmamento estrellado para la familia. Comen saboreando tamales cálidos hechos con masa que se transmitía a lo largo de los siglos como semillas de maíz. En este día de su santo, Sofía guía a la juventud a un nuevo horizonte de posibilidades estelares, saliendo de las guarderías nebulosas y entrando en la certidumbre de las zonas habitables y órbitas de exoplanetas para que todos celebren la primera quinceañera de Andrómeda. I really enjoyed writing kind of the remix of the song and translating it to Spanish. It's not often I write poetry in Spanish because most
Brava.
readers speak English.
Thank
And
you.
fewer times that I would write it as speculative poetry because sometimes the terminology trips me up if I'm talking about starships and different planets and things like that. And I think this next piece is well connected to Andromeda's Quinceañera, and it's also from the chapbook A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness. So this one is titled Upon Meeting Her Descendant. Upon meeting her descendant. Bored of the turbulent trials of the serendipitous present, she slips into the time stream once more. Over 50 and only a child to the cosmos, she delights in knowing that her great-granddaughter 10 times over still carries the gift of Terran sentience. Having traveled long light years, Grandma thinks she can tickle her darling child to spill her secrets, stashed away in children's games and galactic syntax. The girl frowns, unamused, for such physics could anger Muster Mark and confuse the cats. Stay here, she demands. Find a homestead in artificial gravity. Whatever you do, leave the particles where you found them. And I also have a Spanish version of this poem in the chapbook, which was a bit challenging to translate in some parts. And this next piece is quite short, and I have also the Spanish version of the last Spanish poem I have for today. So this is Prayer for the Old Voyagers of Earth, and both versions in English and Spanish are available in Starline 46.1, the winter 2023 issue. Prayer for the Old Voyagers of Earth. We do this for you, the well-deserved culmination of human progress, from the hydrogen of the stars to the iron of our rockets. We love you with the fervor of close family, praising the broad shadow of your discoveries and the spectrum of new worlds that you have provided us. We celebrate the cultures that you have safeguarded under your wing, the secret languages that have calculated immense overseas distances. We recognize your disasters and our own, and the pride that keeps us moving forward, pa'lante. We thank you until the last words disappear. And it reads in Spanish, Oración para los antiguos viajeros de la tierra. Lo hacemos por ti, el merecido colofón del progreso humano desde el hidrógeno de las estrellas hasta el hierro de los cohetes. Te amamos con la furia de un alma familiar, alabando a la sombra amplia de tus descubrimientos y al abanico de nuevos mundos que nos has brindado. Celebramos las culturas que has guardado en tu seno, las lenguas secretas que han calculado distancias inmensas del ultramar. Reconocemos tus desastres y los nuestros, y el orgullo que siempre nos echa pa'lante. Te agradecemos hasta que desaparezcan las últimas palabras. And pa'lante is a word to move forward that doesn't really have the best English translation. It's just two words, para adelante, that come together as pa'lante. This next piece is also kind of an homage to Latinx folks and people who's kind of lost touch with their ancestry and thinking about what that might look like in the future if humans ever travel beyond Earth. And this is titled Last I Checked, and it appears in my chapbook, A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness. Last I checked. Our histories were nowhere to be found in star charts, the names of old turned up on ledgers, while mother tongues were lost, not in flames, but in disuse. Last I checked, the excuses still piled up. Too hard to pronounce, too different of an alphabet, too many ways we went against supposed tradition. Last I checked, on these ships and these planets, we live our truth. Packing recipe books full of memories and photographs of pupusas and tamales stained with mole sauce. Last I checked, we define our own light separate from the crises of the worlds we come from. We command fleets of our kin, the ones who hold these communities together beyond the binary of human triumphs and failures. Last I checked, we deserve lights of our own, guides of our own, and the dignity of existing across the lily pads of space on our own terms. And this next piece is also coming from A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness, and it does have some Spanish, but everything is translated into English following the Spanish. And the title is in Spanish, Somos la cara de la luna, which means we are the face of the moon. Somos la cara de la luna. Somos la cara de la luna, brillando a lo largo de los siglos. We are the face of the moon, shining through the centuries, heartbeats lapping at eternity as our descendants wear our faces, just as we wear those of our antepasados, our ancestors. We are gentle with our legacy, el collar de recuerdos, our necklace of memories. For the little moments span meters instead of light years, uniéndonos como si fuéramos perlas cósmicas, joining us as if we were cosmic pearls. So often we doubt ourselves, dudándonos, wrapping paltry gifts for when we are no more, regalitos para iluminar nuevas lunas, para brindar sabiduría a los ya sabios, gifts to illuminate new moons, to bring wisdom to those already wise. How could we know more of life than those who have bathed in founts of our memories, las sirenas de los mares de tiempo, sirens of the seas of time? We can no longer walk with you, only appearing on El Dia de los Muertos, peering through smoke and ashes after shuttling across entire systems for the Day of the Dead, cohabitating with you for whole lunar cycles as we gleam up at you, accepting your ofrendas, offerings of the food and drink of old, your 23rd century cempasúchil, marigold flowers, our laurels for all the bygone poets. Somos la cara de la luna, aspirándonos a ser inmortales, pero no llegamos a hacerlo por nuestra ternura y amor, los verdaderos rastros de antaño. We are the face of the moon, aspiring to be immortal, yet never achieving it for our tenderness and love, the true traces of yesteryear. I send these words upstream to skies higher than mine, and faces youthful in countenance, yet aged by eons, por todo lo que hemos dejado al partir de este plano de existencia, by all we left while departing from this plane of existence. And in keeping with the multilingual theme, I have multilingual.io, which is a very recently published piece in the Sprawl Mag. There's issue 2.1. And the multi and multilingual also has parentheses around it. 4 generations too late, they became giddy children, clucking along with pollito, chicken, cohete, rocket, estrella, star, un abecedario, an alphabet of translations. They recovered a language from audio files, feeling for tendrils of morphemes and vowel sounds, relishing in tongue twisters, exercising unused muscles. 4 generations too late, they had to make sense of how thick hair and brown eyes came from somewhere, how they themselves were already inhabiting el más allá. They savored the new horizons ancestors spoke for them, holding back tears when they started rolling their R's and doubling A's. 4 generations too late, but right on time for a multilingual IO revival of las lenguas antiguas, la langue et la parole, a metalinguagem do português, Nahuatl, and Quechua catching a ride on their names. Mistakes were made aplenty, awash in stardust, slippages, and translanguaging rocking, but never shaking the foundation of their capacious syntax. And of course, I was thinking about how language evolves and how bilingual users use Spanish and English and what on earth could become in the future and in what languages we might speak. So I have 2 more pieces for this evening. This next one is something I wrote around the same time as Multilingual IO, which is titled La Malinche. And in this case, the parentheses around Mal and Malinche. Malinche was a real person kind of turned into this myth in Mexico of the first translator, this woman who helped translate for Hernan Cortez and had his children. And so this brings a lot of those myths into the context of if she were kind of creating malware in a computer. and this was published in issue 6 of Radon Journal, which also came out this year. La Malinche. The Phoenician alphabet rides waves on the backs of the dispossessed. The engraved and etched, the plumas and pen markings from birds and muscle memories, of braids weaving oral histories as wide as the Chiculo crater, the Florentine Codex awaits us. Bernardino de Sahagún's great-grandson, 50 times over, still squirrels away a monolingual rendition of Las Americas, where his codex has been renamed, yet coded into caravels, caravelas, sailing ships gliding on cosmic photon winds. They called her La Malinche, so I call myself the treacherous translator, Tenepal, creator of malware that tastes of las llamas, flames of the Inquisition could never put out, las llamas del altiplano, las llamadas de mi pueblo, the highland llamas, the calls of my town, boarding documents I forged with a name that only returns on el Dia de los Muertos. Her blood runs through my veins too. I cannot tolerate the diction of one lengua. My language requires a flotilla for safe crossing. I will ride on past the Antilles, the farthest shores of the Galapagos, into the stellar firmament where stray particles become ones and zeros, and the hacker Malinche once was turns a dark canvas into a symphony of Aztec boys and girls singing corridos in bad mother tongues. I vow to be your Malinche, malware in the system, mother of many. They called my offspring mestizo, and so I say their names in Spanglish, tell them bedtime stories when caravels foretold La Conquista, an age of discovery. La Malinche foretells other hypocrisies, little lies, sips of wine from barrels brought with the la mano del obra, la mano del colonizador, la mano de la mujer, Spanish hands. Whoever said Malinche was only woman, only mortal, a ghost in the machine of syntax we speak. Let her distill herself into morphines that leak softly from space-borne vessels. Let her roam por el ligero corriente del tiempo, across the swift currents of time into multilingual horizons. And finally, I'll end with the poem that kind of started the whole idea of a belief in cosmic dailiness, which is titled For You, Fellow Galactic Denizen, which was written for a friend and kind of made me think about the sort of cozy sci-fi poems I wanted to include in the chapbook. And this is a prose poem. For you, fellow galactic denizen. I find my followers, those with tails, puffed ears, or feathers, all imploring me to provide them with relatability and a cosmic sensibility. They sit around campfires roasting s'mores, or setting them on fire with flaming appendages, as I share sci-fi folk music in Spanish about multicultural civilizations and the dalliances of young adults parading across star systems like checker pieces. For you, fellow galactic denizen, I write what sits heavy in those human hearts, the fears that haunt our kin with the zest of optimism and the insight of our elders. Perhaps inner ear translators struggle with shards of existentialism as my emerging voice cracks in its solemn duty of poetic adolescence. You listen patiently for the heart and hearth each tiny marbled world creates until skies darken, gravity adjusts, and you're wearing your coziest pajamas, content to bask in the messiness of existing as a sentient being in this fabled universe. Thank you.
Sorry, I was stunned. Bravo, bravo. Let's see. Can you see me? I think. Oh, okay. I can't see me. So that's okay. Let me see if I can figure out a way to see me. See me. Let's see. More. If I can't see me, I'll give up in a second. Zoom has suddenly become very perplexing. It was very straightforward before, and I
Did
think
you change the view to speaker view?
I did not do that, and it's not allowing me to. It's not offering me view again. I know. I mean, I've done this a lot. I'm just saying that it's not doing this time. So, I will try once more because I don't want to fiddle with it. I'd rather talk to you because,
Yeah.
all right, I'm leaving it. You can see me.
Okay.
If you can see me, that's cool.
Yeah,
I
I
can,
can see you just fine.
you
No
can
big
see me,
deal.
I can't see me, and that's okay for the moment because I don't want to lose the thought of how fabulous and powerful your work is, how moving it is, how I wanted to, at moments, almost weep and cry and felt deeply moved. And so I have a lot of questions for you. Um, but there was one poem, and I just scribbled this down
Mm.
because it was so musical. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you for reading both the English and the Spanish. So often hearing it in Spanish was so beautiful. And then it I could just live off the sound of it, the almost internal rhymes that weren't there in English. So I wanted to ask you about that. Is that deliberate? Are some of them actually rhyming in Spanish and they're not in English? You were blowing my mind.
Yeah, that's true. The ones that I read that are translated into Spanish, so it works a little differently than if I'd written them initially in Spanish, but it absolutely does have some rhymes that just aren't in there. And I think it's just because of the higher incidence of rhymes in Spanish.
Ah,
If like words end in ada or something, like it's easier to put a rhyme that fits a little better than trying to kind of put something that. So yeah, so the rhymes definitely are more prevalent, as well as the fact that I adjusted the first verse of the Las Mañanitas birthday song into this kind of you know
that
uh,
was so
space
delightful.
fairy age.
I loved hearing you sing it. I loved hearing you sing it. And there was one poem in particular. Now, I think it was, I scribbled this. Um, Sometimes we are the face of the moon. Re-
Somos la cara de la luna. We are the face of the moon. Yeah.
We we are the face of the moon. Oh,
Yeah.
Somos. It wasn't sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Somos, right. Okay. We are the face of the moon. There is a song, one of the few songs I know in Spanish, not well enough to sing, not all the words, but I wondered at all if that was at all the undercurrent. El dia que me quieres.
Hmm.
Well, it evoked that for me.
Okay. I'm not sure if I know that one. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I may be saying the name wrong.
Mm.
Um, but it's the first time I heard it was as a jazz tune, but
Mm-hmm.
I went to research it and um, it was written in the 20s and a lot of people have recorded it. So anyway, if that wasn't inspiring you, check out the song because
Yeah.
you're it was it was that kind of rhythm and that kind of evocation. Um, that I really like that very, very much. And La Malenche,
Mm.
I you do a lot of heavy lifting in that poem. So I wanted you to unpack some of that. Is it that this person, as with some other indigenous women facilitators of the conquering colonizers, is it that there's a mixed perception of her? She's both a facilitator and a compromiser.
Yeah.
No, I want to do the same one.
Yeah.
Is
No.
that
Yeah. No, I'd be happy to unpack the poem. And I think something to also note is that in Spanish, one of the words to say language, it also means tongue, la lengua, which means both tongue and language. So there's kind of this in between, and just this idea of Marinche as this original translator of the Spanish. And it's really interesting to see how this idea of her, and of course women as this provocative women who are trying to lure men or trying to deceive them, and those sorts of things kind of got compacted into her story. But then you have this other component, which is that through having children with Hernan Cortez, these are supposedly the first mestizo or mixed Spanish and indigenous children of the Americas. And I'm sure, they weren't necessarily the first, so to speak, but this idea of that they created the idea of what is mestizo. And so often when people, think of Latin Americans, think of Mexicans, they think of someone who's mestizo and it has indigenous and Spanish heritage, but no longer has that cultural connection to their indigenous roots. Whereas
Mm.
in fact, Latinos can be any race or ethnicity, and there are plenty of mestizos, but there are also Afro Latinos,
Mhm.
Latinos who are completely white, a whole range of Asian, African, indigenous, you name it. So I was kind of taking this myth of Malinche and her as this traitorous person and kind of transposing it onto this
Mm.
idea of the malware, of this sort of hacking that goes on, and retelling the story of the colonization. And so this is all coming from what's known as the Florentine Codex, which is this codex that preserves the history of the native peoples of Mexico, but it's so incomplete and created by someone who colonized the area, but kept copious notes. And there's like one or two whole books just of plants and other sorts of flowers. So it's really interesting to see what remains of that time. And I did some
Mm.
projects on this when I was in college. So it was kind of fun to return to these myths and true histories and perceptions that we have of the colonization, and then also just kind of weaving in the Spanish terms for things throughout the poem. So it comes from the Florentine Codex, and then from there, this idea of Malinche as this traitorous person, this hacker, and then also just the wider, backdrop of the colonization of the Americas and what that looks like nowadays, and how people identify themselves and think about themselves and who they come from. And then this, poetic I who's taking on the name of Malinche as being this hacker.
And the Florentine Codex as both history and artifact, but also
Mhm.
suspect since it's not
Yeah.
created by the people of that time. Is
Hmm.
that part of it?
Yeah, basically, the codices that remain have been brought to us largely by these Spanish colonizers who want to
By
kind of
the
lure them
out,
out
right.
by the outsider, right? And so, there's this gratitude for just having any sort of artifact, but then also recognizing kind of the way it's been translated to us, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not that you have to answer it, but I'm saying you evoke, I love it because you evoke all of that. It's so incredibly painful. Can you, that, to try to peer into the past through a lens that somebody else made,
Hmm.
and you're not even sure if it's the right prescription for your eye,
Hmm.
but you do get to see something. You see something. But what is it that you see? Is it so distorted as to be meaningless, or can you still wring out meaning? And then, and what is truth? And that whole confusion, like I said, you did that so masterfully. I didn't know about the Florentine Codex, but I understood what you were telling us about in that poem. That's just fabulous. And so I'd I'd like you to speak for the general audience about a little bit about your process and why you choose to engage these weighty and freighted areas in your poetry.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, as a researcher, I'm a professor of Hispanic studies, right? That's the title, the name of the department at Davidson. That's
Mm.
what we study is all the literatures, languages, and cultures of Latin America, Latinx studies in the United States and Spain, and my research is rooted in Spain. It's what I completed my doctorate in. So I'm coming
Mm.
to these types of poems from the perspective of someone who has Mexican heritage, but who isn't studying this in an academic way, even though sometimes my
Mm.
brain is processing these stories like that. So this poetry is really a means of me kind of grappling it with my own understanding, incomplete, very incomplete understanding of my own heritage, as well as
Mm.
just my own coming to, you know, to learn Spanish and not having grown up speaking Spanish, not having fluent speakers of Spanish in my family. And so for me, a lot of these poems are just an opportunity to kind of grapple with that sense of incompleteness, that sense of identity building, identity formation and growth, and then also my own understanding of these things as a scholar now. So I think, especially with this poem, I really wanted to go with the idea of Malinche because it's something, like I said, I actually did a project in a college class on Latin American civilization, culture, literature from the pre-independence era, so like pre-early
Mm.
1800s. And it was really cool because I had been thinking a lot about translation. I did some translation work in college and still do, and seeing this translator and understanding her as so many things, the translator, the trader, the woman who has birthed
Mhm.
this whole race in a sense, these
Mm.
mestizos. So really trying to let that all converge in the poem, as well as those slips of the tongue or kind of words in Spanish that mean multiple things, like the part where I mentioned the flames and the llamas. It's like, where do we go from flames to llamas? But the reason is that the word in Spanish, llamas, is the same exact word. It means flames and llamas.
Mm.
And then las llamadas de mi pueblo, the calls in my pueblos, it goes from llamas to llamadas, which means calls. So playing around in Spanish with these associations one might make with the word that don't, come as readily in English. Like I said, the Inquisition is one thing, and then these llamas in the Altiplano, the high plains of Peru, is something totally different. And so as someone who's like writing poetry in the 21st century and engaging with Latinx communities and my own culture, it's also thinking about how folks now are thinking about these myths and
Mhm.
using them
Mm.
in
Mhm.
speculative poetry and writing about Malinche or even La Llorona and all of these myths that a lot of people grew up knowing about. I didn't grow up with these myths necessarily, but it still rings true as this kind of part of contemporary Latin American culture, Latinx
Yes.
culture. So
Yes.
yeah.
Um, on television even,
Mm-hmm.
in mass media even, it is finally um, being explored and used. I was thinking about, I'm forgetting the name of the show, but um, it presented the myth of the weeping woman who
Mm-hmm.
steals
La
children.
Llorona. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the main name of the show that did that, but I was just like, oh wow, I didn't know that before. But I'm saying, yeah, now it's in
Mm-hmm.
mass media. How did you begin writing?
I began writing poetry in high school, but I did not write speculative poetry. I've always been really fascinated by science and like physics, astronomy,
Mm.
uh, especially, and wanting to learn more about the cosmos. So that's kind of where the science fiction component comes in. But I didn't know speculative poetry exists, and so I was writing poetry in high school. I didn't feel like I was going anywhere with it. I didn't feel like the poems necessarily resonated with my readers, and I got busy in college and graduate school and just kind of wrote a little bit here and there, but it never really felt like my own or just part of my writing process until I started up again in 2020. And eventually, I don't know exactly when I found out about the Science Fiction Poetry Association, but
Mm.
I found out and quickly joined the SFPA and then started finding my way through speculative poetry and a little bit in the fiction realm of science fiction, short flash pieces, short stories.
Mhm.
And that really felt like somewhere where I could develop my own craft, even if the sorts of topics or themes and ways of using language might be similar to non-genre poems. It still felt like I could really work with this genre in a way that I hadn't really found a home in before when I was just writing just literary poetry and of submitting it here and there.
Even though you haven't put it in this way, I'll just say this. It feels like we would have been incomplete without a quinceañera in space. It just feels so necessary. We would have been, the world would have been incomplete without thinking about creating tamales on Mars. It Are you driven at all? I mean, you're very relaxed about it. And there is a part of me that's just like, oh my God, we need this, we need this. I need to hear this. Because I want to envision that. I want to envision that multicultural future. I I I I want to see that representation. And um anyway, for you to comment on. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I you you are compelling. I wonder if you're impelled. I'm compelled by what you do, but what is impelling you?
No, I think that's I think what you just spoke about, like the tamales on Mars or having a quinceañera in space, those sorts of events that I want to have happen in the future, are definitely what impels me to write the way I do, especially with how challenging and how selective, astronaut training is, and how few women and people of color have even,
Mhm.
gone into space. And then all of these sorts of geopolitical, economic reasons why things are becoming and have been the way they are, and how we might end up at a time when space is more accessible to the majority of people, which therefore means the global majority of people of color, people speaking Englishes other than English as their first language, are going into space and creating their own identities. And I think that's a lot of what interested me in the science fiction genre as a reader. um, I've read a lot of like Alastair Reynolds and these longer, space operas that really do a good job of weaving the
Mm.
human with the larger science fiction, science phenomena. And like I was saying earlier, having not had a quinceañera, or not having access to my
Mhm.
culture as a child, and then here I am as a Spanish professor now, it really makes me want to make these things accessible to other people. And as it happens, around the time I was publishing Andromeda's first quinceañera, somebody else wrote a quinceañera space poem for Apparition Lit, and I did not know this author wrote this, or I don't know if I knew the author at the time at all, but it was just really a great experience to see, like, when people are thinking
Like,
of similar
yay!
ideas, even if the poem's, written in a completely different way, there's still this like hope for these sorts of cultural things to continue, or even on Earth. I think a lot of what I write is kind of geared towards being elsewhere, being beyond Earth, but also very much rooted in like living in the Anthropocene on Earth, and what, who and what can survive this era rather than the exclusivity of space. And I think a lot of other writers have kind of grappling with these universes that they create in their writing, that's very much, everybody can live everywhere and we have multiple species, but then also where we are right now on Earth, and the way that space flight and things of that nature are kind of gatekeeping mechanisms in the face of so much strife and frustration on Earth across cultures.
Yeah, the desire to embrace, to remember. You talk about needing to remember, hold on, to record, and take it forward. Is there a hyphenated futurism for you?
I think I'm mostly aligned with Latinx or Latin futurism. It's often been called Chicano futurism. I mean, I think it's been largely dominated with the conversation among like Chicanx writers, but there's very much a larger sense of Latinx futurism for sure.
Mm, thank you. Well, we're at our last minute. So I'm trying to think of what else can I um
I was also going to briefly mention the fact that my own research and like my dissertation project was about tributes and homages, and I think this idea of archives and paying tribute and who has access to these materials is very much part of my poetry. And I've written a lot of non-genre poems that have to do with the archive, recovering these incomplete lives of women, LGBTQ plus figures in history. Even if we're thinking about Spain, which is this European country, and I'm working with white writers, primarily white writers. Some of them were born or have Latin American heritage, but for the most part, this country that seems like we have everything completed in its history books, but it's still very much affected by sexism and homophobia, just as any other place would be.
Fabulous. Angela, Dr. Angela, thank you so much for your time, for your moving words. I hope everybody looks for your wonderful books. I was delighted to hear poems that I've read before in those other publications read tonight. And congratulations on all your good news and your good work and your new publications. Delighted to have you. And be well, everybody. Peace.
Thank you.
Bye.